Okay, welcome everybody to my studio. You all know I'm Geri Ford, and we're going to talk about threads tonight. And it's going to be in our continuing series for the month of August and probably part of September. We're going to do a series called Embroidery Know-how, and so we're going to do over a lot of refresher stuff. So today we're going to talk about threads, and specifically threads that deal with embroidery, because there's all different kinds of threads and that we use for embroidery. Not a whole lot. I mean, there's a whole lot of different threads, and I'm going to touch on how the different threads are made and what different threads are available, but I'm not going to go into great depth on it. There's the best place to learn about how threads made, how the weights are formed, all of that is if you go to superiorthreads.com. They have got a whole education section. They've got tons and tons of videos. They even have videos on how the stuff is spun, what a right hand twist, a left hand twist is, and more than you'd ever want to know about thread. But basically, for embroidery, we're going to use basically 3 or 4 different types of thread, and that's pretty much all. Let's first talk about the different types of thread. Of course, there's cotton thread, which you can use cotton thread with embroidery. So this is cotton thread. And cotton thread you can use for embroidery. You probably want to pick something that's a little bit thicker, because of cotton thread it's not cotton thread that you sew with, where this is cotton thread that you sew with. It's a little thinner. Also has different properties. This I mostly use in the embroidery machine for quilting. So we like to quilt with our embroidery machine, so therefore I would use a cotton thread. This one happens to be a Robus and Anton, but any of the regular quilting threads you can use. If you're going to use a cotton thread, it's best to pick a long fiber, or they call it long staple cotton. And the difference between a short stable cotton and a long stable cotton is maybe, I think short stable cotton, which is the cheap stuff, is maybe the fibers are 1/8 of an inch long, where a long staple, they're a whopping 1/4 of an inch before they're twisted. So what's nice about it is that it's it has a medium sheen, it's not real shiny, and the natural fibers help to grab the fabric, so it makes a nice tight seam. It's really good for seaming as well as for quilting. The disadvantages of cotton thread is they're linty, and especially the low quality ones are very linty. Now, if you want to use it for regular embroidery, you can. I would probably use a size 14 needle, use a little bit bigger needle, or at least a 12. And this is good as if you're doing like something that looks like counted cross stitch on embroidery machine, I use cotton. Another time that you can use it is if you want that old fashioned DMC hand stitched, floss type look, then use the cotton thread. So that I like to use, and I'll use it for like red work, if I'm doing something really old and red work. One disadvantage to cotton is it is a natural fiber and it is not very color fast. So I usually try to stay away from red because it will bleed. This doesn't bleed as bad as rayon. Rayon's going to bleed a lot more than the cotton. We like to use polyester. It's polyester, okay? And this is, we have polyester and we have rayon. Predominantly, I will use polyester. And why? Because polyester is stronger. It's color fast mostly, where rayon is not. It's less likely to break. It is a very strong thread. It takes quite a bit of force in order to break it. It has a tiny bit of stretch. It's not much stretch, but it is enough with high speed that it's going to cause a little bit more puckering. To counteract this puckering, lower your tension to about normal tension's 4.0, maybe lower it to 3.8, 3.6, and that will counteract that stretch that goes on with the polyester thread. And like I said, I have all of the major brands are fine. Some machines prefer some brands over others. I've never figured out why. It's a good excuse. It's like, oh, my machine hates that thread. Well, it may not. It's probably user error, but it is good to blame the machine. Okay, now this is polyester. This is rayon. Rayon is a shinier thread. It's where the polyester. Now, I take that back. Then the Robison Anton one. It's just slightly shinier. There are other brands that have shinier polyester threads, and that's going to be usually Isocord is pretty shiny. What's the other one that everybody? Oh, Floriani is another one that's a very shiny polyester. So those are all, they all work in my machine. They may require different tensions on your machine because every machine is different and every brand of thread is slightly different. Okay, now this breaks very easily. Okay. The other disadvantages, it bleeds. It is not color fast. So if you're going to be washing something a lot, you don't want to use the rayon. It's going to bleed. It also has more tension issues because how these are made is that all rayon thread is white when it's wound. And then as you wind it, I mean, as how they get the colors is they put it in they wind it onto the spools or master spools. They put it in this like pressure cooker type thing. They put pressure and dye, and the darker the thread, the longer it stays in that vat of dye. And dyes have caustic chemicals. A darker thread is absorbing more of the color dye, and therefore it's slightly thicker than a light colored thread. So you can have slightly different tensions with the different colors. I usually, as a rule, stay away from black, brown, navy blue, dark green, dark gray, any of the dark colors. I usually will stay away from rayon because they're gonna fade on you. So, and they'll bleed on you, and they're thicker and they're more brittle. You know, so the longer it sits in that vat of dye, the worse it is as far as being brittle. Okay, but the advantage is because it breaks, it has no stretch at all, and it gives you a better stitch. My favorite to use in white is white thread because it's got a really pretty shine. And the other thing too is that rayon thread has a shorter shelf life. Polyester thread lasts for, well, so far over 75 years, and I've got polyester thread from right after World War II, and I think it's still good. I know it's from the 60s and 70s when they really came out with polyester thread. I still have some, and it's still fine. Now, if cotton thread has a shelf life of about 25 years. If you have cotton thread for sewing, and if it breaks that easily, don't sew with it. It's going to mess up your machine. But yes, cotton thread has a shelf life of about 25 years, rayon's about 20, and polyester so far is at a good 75 years and climbing. Silk thread, I don't use for embroidery. However, it's absolute. I do use it for quilting, and I do use it for needle turn. Silk is very, very strong. Like I said, it's very, very thin, mostly. There are thicker ones. There's I think a 30 weight silk. It's a slightly thicker silk that you can use for embroidery. Now, it's expensive. This little tiny spool is like $6 for this little tiny spool. It only has 200 meters on it. So if I were to embroider, if the only thing I could ever think that I would use silk thread to embroider is if I'm doing a high-end bridal veil and I'm going to do something very light and airy with a lot of fabric showing through that doesn't take up a mass amount of thread and a lot of zigzagging or really, satin stitches, and I probably might use this thread. But silk also has has a shelf life of about 90 years. There's things from the 1920s that are still good. In fact, there's even some silk from the 1800s, silk fabrics and silk brocades. The fabrics are tearing up because they used to use metals in order to process as a sizing on those silk fabrics, but the threads were always just pure silk. So you'll see in museums, you'll see these beautifully brocaded and embroidered things. The embroidery is holding up the thread, the fabric is shredding. There's different kinds of polyesters. There's what they call core spun poly. What a core spun polyester is that it's just cotton thread, two thin cotton threads that that are spun together, 2 or 3 or whatever. There's no core in the middle of it. The problem with core spun poly is that it puckers, but it does stitch out well, and it disadvantages, it's very linty. Then you have filament poly, and filament poly is essentially bobbin thread. Polyester bobbin thread is filament poly, which means this is one long filament, and it's just twisted. Sometimes it's 2-ply, sometimes it's more than that. They're very thin, they're very stretchy, but they recover pretty well. See, they're pretty stretchy. It's not quite as strong as the core spun, but it's a finer thread. Okay, then you have the monofilament polyester. I don't use it, and it isn't used in embroidery. And what it is, it's a single strand of polyester similar to fishing line. And the advantage is that it's very fine, it blends real well. It can be ironed on medium heat. And the disadvantages to monofilament polyesters are the tensions are kind of hard to control. It also doesn't like to thread. Then you have spun polyester, and is twisting of small staple threads, and that is what polyester sewing thread is. Okay, regular like Metrazine, Metler, Gutermann, all of these. And this is a spun polyester, and it's twisted of small polyester fiber to make together to make a really long strand. And these are nice, and these aren't very expensive to make. They're priced lower than normal threads. The disadvantages to polyester threads are that it has varying levels of lint depending on the manufacturer, and it's not quite as strong as the filament or corresponding polyester threads. Now, this is polyester. This is polyester. Both of them are very strong threads. This is a very strong thread. This is tightly wound, so therefore it's designed to sew seams with. This is loosely twisted, and that's what causes the shine, makes it very shiny. But the problem is that if you try to sew with this one, it doesn't hold up to a property called abrasion. So if you were, running up and down you had it as a seam, and it's going up and down other fabric and your skin and stuff, this is going to start shredding and breaking very quickly. Where this tightly wound polyester thread for sewing, Metrazine and Gutermann, it's extremely tightly wound, and therefore it's strong, and it does hold up to abrasion. That's the biggest thing. Here's a bottom line, which is a really fine one. This one's a filament polyester. Okay, so it's long, thin strands of polyester fiber that are twisted together. Usually it's 2-ply, but this is pretty strong. Now there's also nylon thread, and nylon thread is not used in embroidery, but we do use it for sewing, and we call it invisible thread. There's 2 kinds of invisible thread. There's a nylon, which has got a matte finish, and polyester, which is that monofilament polyester. It's very strong. This does not break nearly as easily. This is notorious for breaking. Also, needle threaders hate both of these. So be prepared to thread your needles by yourself. The worst thing about the nylon is if you hit it with a hot iron, it's going to melt. The polyester, you're going to have that on the hottest iron you can get. It can go and hold it there for a while before it melts. It's got a much higher temperature to melt. This one is more invisible than this one. However, neither one are truly invisible because they do reflect light. So therefore they have a little bit of sheen to them. Also, don't use these threads on things for babies. Why? Because both of them are notorious for skipping stitches. They're terrible. They have a lot of stretch to them, which is why they skip stitches. But if you're giving it to a baby, little fingers and toes can get caught up underneath of that stitching and cut off circulation. So just don't use it on baby things. Okay, then there's also some textured polyesters. This is one where it's just fuzzy. Okay, it's just a fuzzy thread and it's made like that. Now, if you're buying cotton thread, and I don't know if you can see, you've got some thick areas and some thin areas. It's very uneven. It's going to wreak havoc with your tensioning, but this is going to give it texture. Some people use it for thread painting because it's got that fuzzy quality in it. There's also wool thread, which is called Lana thread, which is by Madeira, and it's very fuzzy. It's made out of wool. I have embroidered with this. However, it has to be digitized for this wool Lana thread. They're really nice because I have some designs that are animals and they're designed for this Lana thread. And it's a thick thread, so your stitches are further apart. You don't want to use this with a regular embroidery because it's going to be too dense and then make a big glob. So it has to be digitized for this. But what's neat about this stuff is after you're done embroidering the animal or whatever, I think this I went ahead for a little fox or something, you can brush it with a metal brush or a toothbrush, and it fuzzes up really well and it looks like fur. So I have used this for embroidery. If you're going to use a Lana thread, then you want to go ahead and use a size 14 needle, usually a Topstitch needle. One of my favorites that you can use for basting is wash away thread. And it's this is nothing but starch. It's spun starch. And the problem is if you wet it, it'll just literally fall apart. This I like for basting, especially if you're basting really close to your stitching when we put the basting stitch to hold on our topping or our fabric, if we're just floating our design floating our fabric onto the hoop. Let's see. Let's get to our favorite stuff in the whole world. Metallic thread. Okay. We love to use metallic thread. It's beautiful, it's shiny, and it's a pain in the neck. Why? I'll show you why. Let me take this off. Okay. Okay, here's this out of the way. Here's what happens. Look how stretchy it is. It's like sewing with elastic thread. That's why it doesn't work very well, but there are things you can do to overcome this. Okay, number one, slow down your machine. A lot of our embroidery machines go up to 1,050 stitches per minute. Well, that's asking for disaster with a metallic thread. You want to go as slow as you possibly can because it needs time for that needle, for that thread to relax as that stitch is being formed in order to form a loop. If it's going too fast, the hook is going to miss. And you're going to end up with skip stitches, then it starts to shred it, and then it's broken. So first thing, slow your machine down. Number two, you want this to come off the spool with little to no resistance. So in other words, a lot of times I will put this on the horizontal spool pin and take off the spool cap so that it comes off with no pressure. I've got a lot of it here, mess. It comes off with little to no pressure. Okay. This is what they call cross-wound thread. See the X's that it's formed in there? That means it's designed to come off this way. So if you have a machine that has a thread stand, then if it doesn't, then I would recommend getting one like this. So I would put this here, run this up through here, put it inside here, and then go across to your machine. And this is coming off with little to no pressure at all. And don't get those if they're plastic because they keep falling down, causing more trouble. If you're going to use these, don't put them right beside the flywheel because the thread's going to drip down and go into the thread and make a big mess. If you have a machine that only has a horizontal spool pin, You can use these. These will attach to your bobbin, the bobbin winder on the top of your machine. This one is Madeira. It's called stack wound, which means it's wound from up to down, up and down. Because it's stack wound, it's designed to come off this way. So that case, then I would use this one. And usually I won't put it on here tight because I want this to come off this way very easily. And so stack wound should come off from the side, and the cross wound needs to come off the top. And why? It's because it's the way the thread is twisted. So if this were to come off this way, you're adding twist to the thread that shouldn't be there. And that's not really that important in this kind, because this is the one from Madeira, and it's like a glitter thread. And this thing works really well. I really like this thread. It's not quite as shiny as like the Robeson Anton, like this one, but it works really well. A stack wound, if you were to have it go this way, I don't know if you can see this, but it's causing extra twist. See how you see thin, thick, thin, thick, thin, thick? This is that hollow shimmer, which is a flat ribbon, and it is designed to come off this way. And if you make it go this way, you end up adding twist to it, and it's not as pretty. It has to come off like this. You can either have it go this way, and this thing attaches to the bobbin. These things, okay? These are made for sergers, and you can get them. I think Madame So has them. You put this on this way and sort of snap it like that. And then you put this on. Say, here's the back of the machine where it sticks up. Like I tell everybody, if you spend less than $12 on a spool of metallic thread, put it back. You're asking for trouble, because the cheap stuff will flake off in your machine and make a big mess. So, but I like my metallic thread. I love my bling. You want to use a metallic needle, and what a metallic needle is it's a regular embroidery needle. However, the eye is coated in Teflon, and usually the eye is just a little bit bigger, and it's to resist the friction that this thread causes. If you have trouble with it for metallic thread, I prefer to use a size 14 Topstitch needle. An embroidery needle and a metallic needle are what they call a universal point. This is what a sharp needle looks like. And this is a regular sharp. On a Topstitch, the eye is about that much bigger. The other, also a quilting needle, is also a sharp. However, the taper is deeper. Okay, instead of it being that long, this is much sharper and deeper. That's what a quilting needle is. A regular embroidery needle is what they call a universal point, which means it's slightly rounded at the tip and has a relatively small eye. An embroidery is going to be a universal with a longer eye, a bigger eye. The other difference between a universal point and an embroidery universal is what it is made out of. A regular needle, as it stitches, it'll start, as it gets warm, it bends like this. So the more stitching it goes, the more it bends, and then it can eventually be so warm and malleable that it's going to hit the plate or hit the foot or something. But what happens with and then it'll break. Okay, and a regular needle is made out of a coated aluminum coated, or what do you call it, stainless steel coated metal core. I don't know what the metal is, and it tends to bend. A bending needle will mess up your bobbin case and your needle plate. The embroidery needles and the metallic needles are made of a hardened steel, and therefore they shatter rather than bend. and therefore a shattering needle will not mess up your machine, because it'll hit that foot and shatter. And if you've ever noticed, it'll shatter until at least 3 pieces, and some of them you can't even find. So that is safer for your machine. A bending needle is going to go in and make a hole. Like, I don't know if you can see the hole. It's not big enough. I think I brushed it out. There's a little tiny hole, like right here. You can't see it. But yes, that was caused by a bending needle. A shattering needle is not going to mess up your bobbin case. That's the other difference. The other difference, there's also what they call titanium coated needles or Teflon needles, non-stick needles. Those are all basically, if it's an embroidery needle, it's made out of the same thing. It just has a coating that's going to resist gumming up. Also, the titanium coated needles, and I think Oregon makes them. There's lots of people who make them. The difference is that those are made to resist gumming up. If you're going to be using stick and tear away, the sticky stuff, that's designed to resist gumming up. But we also found that they stay sharper longer, about 1/3 longer. Usually we tell everybody for regular sewing, you're supposed to change your needle after 8 hours of continuous sewing. However, embroidery, it's more like 2 hours of continuous sewing. Why? Because our machines go so fast. A regular sewing machine, like when you're sewing a seam, you're really excited if it goes more than about 200 to 400 stitches per minute on the average. If you're a fast I'm a fast quilter, and my TR, I never make it go more than 800 stitches per minute, and that's flying for me. But an embroidery machine, that's pretty routine. So think how many seams you have to sew to equal the same number of stitches. So therefore, sewing needles don't wear as fast. Embroidery needles, they're going to go pretty fast. Like I said, after 2 hours of stitching, I would change it. However, if you're continuously stitching, like you're making this big long 120,000 stitches, and you're going to be stitching for like 4 hours straight, be prepared to change the needle. Also, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes of continuous stitching. That needle's getting pretty hot. It's getting pretty malleable, whether it's a titanium needle or a regular embroidery needle. It's getting warm. And as it gets warm, it starts to bend. So usually, as rule of thumb, if you have run out of bobbin thread and it tells you to change your bobbin, change your needle. I'm not saying don't say get rid of the needle, but just change it out. Change out to a fresh needle. Let that core get really cold, so that the next time you change the bobbin, you can put that needle back. I'm supposed to tell you that you're supposed to change a needle with every project. Okay, I just told you what I'm supposed to tell you. Do I do that? No, I don't. I change a needle when I start to have problems, and you can hear it. When you start to hear that dull thump, 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 thump noise on your stitching, then you know it's getting time to change that needle, so that the next time it asks for a bobbin change the needle and get rid of that one. Also, if you start getting shredding or breaking threads or shredding, change the needle. That's usually the first thing when I'm having trouble with embroidery, the first thing I do usually is change the needle. If that fixes it, then I know it was the needle. If it didn't fix it, then I know to go look for something else. And it may not be the problem. Like I said, I mostly will use either size 12 or size 14 or 11 and 13, depending on the brand you're using. This is the bobbin case for embroidery. This is using the pre-wound bobbins. Okay, if you're using a brother or a baby lock, it'll have that dot in the middle. Sometimes it's green, sometimes it's red, sometimes it's purple. Also, the set screw right here. Let's see, so the right way. The one that is the straight slot is the tensioning adjustment. If your bobbin case has no, nothing there, just plain silver. Or if it has been painted pink, that means this one is designed for pre-wound bobbins. Here's a pre-wound bobbin, okay? When you have your bobbin case, see the little cross for the Phillips head? Don't touch that one. That means no, because that's what holds the thing together. Ask me how I know what happens to this thing if you take that out. Means you take it to Justin to have him fix it, okay? Also, this fuzzy part is supposed to be there. That's what holds the thread when you use the scissor. It also is a pre-tensioner. So if you peel it off for some reason, you can glue it back on with super glue, but don't take it off because it's not going to work. I know. The other bobbin case will have no dot, and that's designed for you winding your own bobbins, or if you're using regular sewing thread. And that this will be painted green for the most part. And then a lot of machines came with a gray bobbin case. That's for either bobbin work or having a good time adjusting it yourself. Like if you're doing for quilting or thread painting, I like to manipulate my own tensions. Then I will use the gray bobbin case. Speaking of bobbins, okay, you want to use the right bobbin for your machine. Our machines will basically use two types of bobbins. This one for the baby lock and the brother are what's called a class 15 bobbin. Then there's something called a class L bobbin. It's thinner. It's designed for older machines. Sometimes quilting machines will use an L bobbin. I have a whole boxes of this stuff, but my machines, I only have one machine that takes this size bobbin. However, you can still use these pre-wound bobbins because most of the machines came with this bobbin leveler. And what it is you put this in, and it is now the same size as the the class 15 bobbin. So if you have these, what you do is you drop them in. You drop this in first, and then just put your bobbin in there. And then, of course, you know the bobbins are wound so that I say today's embroidery is brought to you by the letter P because it makes a P. Well, it's hard to see on this. It makes the letter P. You drop it in, and then that's in correctly, and then run it through the bobbin, the pre-bobbin thing over to the side. If you have an oscillating bobbin, then it would go so that it makes a, I don't know, a 9. Okay, if you roll it over and it makes a 9, then that's for an oscillating bobbin. If it makes a P, it isn't. It's for a drop-in bobbin. Now, these are the good bobbins. Okay, they're the ones that come with the machine are a slight blue color. And also you can get baby lock or brother bobbins at this slight blue color. Then these are the ones that the new pre-wound bobbins come on, and they can get cloudy. You can also get pre-wound bobbins with a cardboard case. Can you use them? Yes, but if you're using a cardboard case, it's going to disable your bobbin sensor. So you're not going to be able to tell when that bobbin's getting low. You're going to have to keep an eye on it yourself. Another thing too is they tell you not to use these are pre-wounds. They're made with an inferior plastic. Also, the ones that come with the machine have ever so slight doming so that they will rock back and forth, where these do not, or a little bit less. It still domes, has a little dome. The problem, because I still use them. But this one is about to retire and give it to Lily, whose favorite toy is a bobbin, is because when it gets older and is used a lot, it starts to craze, and you'll see it sort of become milky colored. That means it's getting ready to break. That means if you wind it too aggressively, it's going to bend outward. See, because you can, it's hard to do it, but you can bend these outward a little bit. So they do flex a tiny bit. And then there's this one that looks suspiciously like a good bobbin, but this one is a Singer bobbin, and it really rocks. It's designed for a different machine. tape. See that one? This one is clearer. This is a new one I just got out of the box. And this one's been used for a while, and I can see little cracks along the inside. So Lily's going to get this one later on. Next time she comes up begging, I'll give her that one. I never give her these. She steals them though. Also, don't wind your bobbins super fast. Winding them at a moderate rate is a little bit better. Oh, I think the last thing I want to talk about is how you're supposed to store your threads. This is not how. Okay. I like my wall of color. I'm sorry. I keep the curtains drawn all the time. I keep them out of sunlight. I vacuum them off once in a while, but you know, I don't care. I like my wall of color. But what I do with my threads is I use this stuff. It's called Hugo's Amazing Tape, and it comes on a roll and you can cut it. So this is how I store my threads. So they're protected from most of the dust. And it stays and it's reusable. If you can't find Hugo's Amazing Tape, then just get some thin vinyl, from the thinnest vinyl you can from Joann's, and cut it in strips, and you can use it. If it gets pollution attaches to it, because yeah, we got wildfire stuff around here, so I'm sure that as soon as those wildfires are over, I'm going to do a thread cleaning day where I take all these off, and you just take alcohol and wipe them down, and they're good as new. So that the Amazing Tape will be good as new. Ideally, you should put them in boxes or bins or in drawers. We'll have that too. So, okay, so I think that's all I have for you guys. Okay, so anyone have any questions? Tracy's good, and Jeannie, I don't see anything from them. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off on Facebook. So I will see you guys next week, and we are going to talk about painting background fabric to create landscapes or nature scenes. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. Okay, I'll see you guys on Facebook next week, and we'll be back on Thursday.